So today we're going to be reading A Drop of Color, Bloody Painter X F Listener Up in here. So we are currently in chapter 11, A Disappointing Parting, but we're going to go back a chapter for the purpose of the recap. So basically, if we do not remember, which is understandable, this story is quite long. Or chapter specifically. Anyways, basically, while we were walking through the forest and the light / spirits guided us and Bloody Paint Helen, we suddenly had to stop because we felt things whizzing past us. Remember, since we can't hear them, we can feel them. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's just think of it as really big, fast flies, pretty much. Eventually one hits us in her stomach by accident because obviously he misjudged. And once we try to help him get him up, and we were like, "Hey, are you okay?" He jumped. He's like, "What the fuck?" And we just started talking to him. Then, eventually, as the more we talked, he eventually got back down, zoomed to another fairy, communicated them with the movement of their wings, kind of like sign language, if you think, just with their wings. And apparently more fairies stopped zooming past us and just went to the ground or onto some stuff to look at us in curiosity. Eventually we started talking to that one fairy again, while another fairy with buns that looks very authoritative started talking to Helen, a much more, probably more productive conversation than we were having. Eventually that bunned authoritative fairy talks to you, wants you to mentions that Helen said that the name of Dorian, I believe his grandfather and his mother's name, and she wants us to go to the elders, the fairy elders, to talk with them and see if they can, make a plan to go against one of the people that are the main reason that they are outcasted / have to stay hidden. And that's where we basically kind of stopped as we were on our way there. So yeah, by the way, that fairy I was mentioning that bumped into us in the stomach by accident, his name is Aiden, and it means little fire. I think that's super cute. Anyways, now we are officially in chapter 11, A Disappointing Parting. Marching along through the forest after the pixie who had sped off before you and barely managing to keep her tiny form just on the edge of your vision in the distance, you couldn't necessarily say that your walk was a silent one anymore. Aiden, your new little pixie friend, had gotten himself rather comfortable and settled on your shoulder, as he was now sitting on your shoulder blade, and he had his legs dangling over your shoulder and against your chest. Sometimes he would have to put up a hand. And place it upon your neck in order to keep himself balanced whenever a sudden movement of yours threatened to push him off. But for the most part, he seemed to be rather comfortable and happy to be perched upon your shoulder. And he chatted your ear off the whole long way. He talked about everything and anything, from the different types of plant life that grew in these parts, to the bugs that he sometimes saw, to even the interesting shaped clouds that happened to pass by, a small clearing of trees that exposed the gray sky to the dark forest below. He had already mentioned his distaste of the fairies, which only backed up the claim that Helen had previously made about pixies and fairies not getting along, and went on an actual tangent about not understanding any species of creature who relied solely on a diet of leaves, flowers, and grass. Apparently the pixies were quite fond of Big, heaping chunks of meat, and other half the time never even bothered to cook it before sinking their razor-sharp teeth into their meal. In fact, it was quite difficult for you to even get a word into the conversation at some points, and you assumed that Aiden just really liked to hear himself talk. You suppose that it was to be expected, as this was probably the first time that he's not only heard the sound of his own voice, but the sound of any voice. Brushing some of his shaggy bangs out of his eyes, he then stole a glance at Helen, who was still walking alongside of you. He had taken a step away once again and maintained his comfort of distance. Now that the other pixies who had been previously meticulously circling the both of you seemed to have lost interest and drifted away. A few stranglers had still remained to flutter close by, but for the most of them had flown up and ahead to join the first pixie who was leading the way. The only one who was stubbornly remained within close proximity to you and Helen was Aiden. But you weren't bothered by that. On the contrary, you would be rather sad if he had decided to fly away as well. Turning towards you next, Aiden let out a little laugh as he considered Helen. "He's so quiet," Aiden commented, reaching out once again in an attempt to poke Helen so they could converse as well. Yet Aiden's tiny little arm just wasn't long enough. "How come he won't talk, eh?" "Everyone's different, Aiden," you reminded him nonchalantly. "I think it takes him a while to warm up to people." "Oh, yeah?" Aiden asked, squinting and blinking a bit in his nearsightedness in an attempt to better see Helen from a spot on your shoulder. "How long, then, did it take for the two of you to be friends?" I'm not sure if we are." You began hesitantly, only to trail off into silence. "Could you really consider you and Helen to be friends? You certainly were partners up at this point, and were working towards the same goal. You were going out on this curious and even somewhat dangerous excursion together. Surely you could be considered friends, at least in some definition of the word, right?" Although it was easy to see that Helen still wasn't completely comfortable around you. Would you have to prove yourself to him, or prove your loyalty, much like you would have to do with the pixies, dragons, fairies, and any other creature that you were to come across in this strange world? Did friends even have to prove themselves to each other? Aiden hummed before tilting his head lightly to the side in evident confusion. Jumping off of your shoulder completely, he fluttered his way right in front of Helen's face in order to get his attention before coming to a land on Helen's shoulder instead. You had to say, your shoulder really did feel quite empty and cold, now that the extra weight and warmth of the pixie that you had now grown so used to had flown away. Looking over towards Helen, you observe him once again getting a bit jumpy as Aiden came to a land on his shoulder, and his shoulder cringling a bit at the most likely loud volume of Aiden's voice. He tended to yell instead of talk. You could see Aiden moving his arms in a rather animated gestures before placing his hands on his hips and tapping his foot on Helen's shoulder, as well as Helen scrambling to come up with a response to what was most likely irritating and intrusive questions. He let out a laugh that could be heard by no one at the scenario, because even you had to admit it was rather funny to watch Helen trying to deal with Aiden. In fact, you were rather tempted to grab a hold of Helen's wrist and hear for yourself exactly what type of conversation was currently going on between the two, or maybe a mischievous side of you just wanted to hear Helen struggle. You lightly scolded yourself for even thinking this. Perhaps Aiden's personality was already began to rub off on you. Yet, before you had even the opportunity to do so, a new sensation greeted your eyes. It was a light. A natural light. Nothing like the artificial light that you knew now led towards the city where Erebus and his reign resided. It also wasn't like the spirits that had the tendency to be soft, glowing, and hover warmly around you. Instead, it was much like sunlight, and a bit like the stereotypical light at the end of the tunnel such sensation. Or, perhaps in this case, more like a light towards the very edge of the forest, and most likely very close to where the pixies had set up the refuge. Aiden seemed to realize this as well, ditching his attempts at a light-hearted argument with Helen. He left Helen's touch, much to Helen's relief, for even you couldn't miss to say he sighed in content at the once again welcome silence, and approached you. Instead of coming to a rest on your shoulder, though, he instead fluttered right in front of your face, which inevitably caused you to come to a stop, for it was hard to concentrate your attention on the path in front of you when Helen's form covered the focus of your vision. Reaching both hands out this time, he placed them upon your cheeks as his dark eyes searched your face, almost as if he was trying to take in every single detail that he could. You could tell that the happiness that he had previously been feeling had melted away as a more serious look crossed his conscience? Yeah. As his emotions heightened, the skin on his hands, which were currently pressed against your cheeks, seemed to warm up just slightly. We're almost at my home, Aiden then announced, and you just grabbed Helen's hand in one motion so that he might be able to listen to the conversation too. For this time, it seemed important. You are currently under no threat. Aiden continued to speak. We bring you to our hideaway in peace and trust. You will speak with the elders. They are the only remaining ones left who has seen the world in its beautiful days, as well as its downfall. They have built this place and begun to recreate our population. This place is very important to us. It is where we house our young, sick, weak, and vulnerable. No one will attack you, but you cannot stay here for long. As I mentioned before, humans are not normally welcomed here. We understand. You nodded seriously. And we're honored to be trusted to come to this place. Helen added softly and hesitantly, and Aiden nodded in recognition. I very much enjoyed our conversation. He continued. The skin on his hands warmed up a bit more against your cheeks as he continued to speak. It was almost to the point where it began to feel uncomfortable. You wanted to pull away almost, but what Aiden had to say was more important. I would imagine that you'll be sent away once you're finished talking with the elders. But I'm sorry to see you go. I like you. I never imagined I could be friends with a human. Not waiting for your response, Aiden broke contact with you completely and pulled away. The spots on your cheeks that Aiden had previously been resting his hands against felt icy and chilled upon contact with the air. Now that the borderline burning sensation was gone, squinting in your direction in a final attempt to see your face as he floated further away from you, he gestured at you with his arm to continue following him through the final layers of the trees before turning back around and fluttering away, his small body growing all the more tinier as the distance was further put between you. Helen leaned forward a bit in order to catch a glimpse of the expression on your face, which was rather disheartened indeed. Not letting go of your hand this time, Helen's own face scrunched into a look of contemplation as he considered what you could possibly be feeling. Indecisively, he took in a breath of air before attempting to talk to you. Are you okay? He asked quietly, keeping a hold of your hand as you resumed walking again, this time following Aiden the rest of the way. I really liked him, you muttered disappointingly. He was bright. Helen nodded lightly in recognition. I've never had a friend to lose before, but I'd imagine that it's rather sad. It is, you agreed. Well, hopefully we don't lose each other, at the very least. Helen started a bit at the implication behind your words, and if there was any time there would have been a loss for words. It was now. Taking in a shaky breath, he finally found a few words to spare, though. Don't worry, he concluded. I don't think we will. Pushing away the final branches that now stood in your way, you pushed yourself out of the dark forest and into a beautiful and expansive field beyond. Lush, tall trees grew up to the point where it was almost at your knees. A stray tree stood tall and high in the field every now and then, and patches of wildflowers littered the field. A light and freshly warm breeze tousled you and Helen's hair about, and the wonderful scent of grass, spring, and earth filled your nose. Yet you couldn't help but look around in the place in confusion. Where were the pixies? Where was their shelter? Ever since crossing the line of trees that would lead you back into the forest, you had not seen a single pixie. They had all disappeared. Even Adam. As far as you could see, it was just you and Helen in this massive field all alone. Where did they go? You questioned, looking around in puzzlement. Do you see any shelters? They wouldn't build anything out in the open, Helen explained gently. Remember, they have constructed hideouts. They don't want something that would be easy to find. True. You mused. Do you think that they'll bring the elders out to meet us then? I would imagine. Ellen agreed. After all, even though they are currently being peaceful, they wouldn't trust us enough to take us to the place where they could house their children and sick. That makes sense. You recognized, and a more curious part of you couldn't help but wonder exactly how tiny a pixie child would be. Ah, Helen noted, pointing a finger towards the blades of grass that began to move and sway in ways that had nothing to do with the light breeze that blew about the field. How smart. It seems that they build their own community underground. You strained your eyes in the direction that Helen was indicating. Soon enough, several pixies began to rise up from the tall grass that surrounded you and Helen. Most of them you could not recognize, although you did see the pixie with the space buns that had spoken to Helen amongst them. You assumed that the majority of these pixies were the elders, as well as several younger pixies to guard and protect them, although as far as you could see, none of the pixies before you looked exactly elderly. Much to your disappointment, you did not see Aiden amongst any of the pixies. Perhaps he had stayed below. One by one, the group of pixies approached you and Helen slowly. The entire time you did not let go of Helen's hand, even if it was becoming rather sweaty in your grasp. You imagined him to be nervous. Maybe you were too, even if only just a little. One thing was for sure. You had to make sure that the conversation went right. Understandable, I'd be nervous too. Alright, y'all, so I believe we are in chapter 12. A strange request. One by one, the pixies rose out of the tall, gray grass as it swayed sweetly in a warm but cool breeze and harbored the wondrous scent of earth and spring, mimicking the same scent of mud and plants after a late March or early April rain shower. Surely the pixies could have chosen a more peaceful place to build their hideout, as it gave off the impression of a world that was just beginning to wake up after a long, cold winter. But it hadn't yet quite had the chance to allow the sun to warm the environment up enough to produce flowers and leaves. You and Helen shared a perplexed glance as your nervousness began to melt away. For, as Aiden had claimed, it didn't seem as if these pixies were here to harm you, and your efforts were not met with hostility. The pixies that you assumed to be the elders hovered just barely above the grass. The long and wispy blades lightly brushed against their legs in the soft wind. The younger pixies, who you assumed to be the guards, floated a bit higher above them, keeping their pupilless eyes fixated on you and Helen in a gaze that was meant to communicate that they had their utmost attention on you, and you'd better not try anything funny. You had to say, the supposed hierarchy between these pixies and how they had chosen to express it was interesting, to say the least. You wondered where Aiden held up in the scope of the apparent pyramid, for he had remained underground. Perhaps he was not very high up, and it certainly made sense, considering the condescending way that the other pixies had chosen to communicate with him in. Now that kind of makes me feel bad for the poor guy. Anyway. The elder that was closest to you and the furthest in the front of the group finally broke formation and fluttered towards you hesitantly. Several guard pixies continuously circled around not only her, but you and Helen as well. She had light-looking wavy hair that stopped just below her shoulder blades, and a skin tone that was neither pale nor dark. The deep and protruding look in her eyes bore into you with a certain curiosity that rivaled only yours. And like the rest of the pixies, she was dressed in clothing constructed from animal skins and furs. Very similar to the pictures you had seen of how people dressed in ancient times, yet managing to seem a bit more modern and classy in style and design. In her particular case, her fur dress was formed fitting around the torso, while the flowing knee-length skirt was made up of the long, patterned dark feathers of a bird whose species you did not know. Upon further observation, you noted that a pair of unique-looking weapons constructed from animal bones rested against her hips. If you had to be honest, she was definitely the prettiest of the bunch, and for some reason, you were glad that she was the one who had chosen to approach you. For her very presence was calming. Her dark eyes shifted in between you and Helen for a second before focusing on your pin, and then on his, before finally coming to a stop on your hands, which was still gripping tightly to the other as you and Helen were both unwilling to break your trusted form of communication in a time like this. What do you think she's doing? You couldn't help but ask Helen as you eyed the pixie before you, your curiosity once again getting the best of you. As soon as your lips started to move and you went through the undeniable motions of speech, the pixie froze in astonishment as she saw for herself that the rumors she had heard from her patrol pixies were indeed true. Right in front of her were two humans that had the ability to communicate with each other through sound. She probably heard that we can speak, Helen muttered quietly, eyeing the pixie apprehensively as she now turned her large and unblinking eyes onto him as he responded to you, even though she couldn't hear him. And maybe she's trying to figure out how we do it. Well, she can't hear us like that, you pointed out matter-of-factly, and before Helen had the chance to stop you, you extended your hand out in a move that was rather bold, with your palm pointed upward, just like you had done for Aiden. Yet it would seem that the pixie was far more jumpy than Aiden was, for she flew several feet upon your sudden motion, and several of the guard pixies instantly reached for their weapons, which now you noticed were all made out of dangerously sharpened animal bones and teeth. Helen let go of your hand, only to grab your wrist next and take several steps back, tugging you along with him. Careful, YN, he whispered furiously in anxiety. They're not all like that friend you made. They don't trust us, remember? And we shouldn't be so quick to trust them either. Wincing a bit at your foolishness and Helen's tiny jab of ridicule, you focused your attention back on the pixie before you and managed to catch her eye. I'm sorry. You apologized directly to her, even though you knew she wasn't able to hear what you were saying. Trying again, you turned the palm of your hand upwards and held it out in an offer to her, yet this time at an increased distance and not quite as quick with your motions. The guard pixies kept their hands rested against their weapons as they watched you, and some of them even pulled out in preparation. Excuse me. Helen took a quickened intake of breath next to you, but you ignored them all, focusing on every ounce of your attention that you possessed solely on the hesitant pixie who you knew wanted to speak with you. After a few seconds of observation and consideration on her part, it would seem that she finally seemed willing to take the leap and come in contact with you. Meeting your gaze, she gave you a firm nod before slowly fluttering her way toward you and making a soft land on your hand. She seemed a bit uncomfortable with being in such a close proximity of a human, but she swallowed her discomfort for the sake of her evidently burning curiosity to hear your story. Raising your hand up so it was at face level with you, you decided that now was finally the time to speak with her, for you weren't sure if she would be first to break the silence. Yet at the same time, you didn't want to frighten her, so you made sure to keep your voice quiet. After all, she had most likely never heard sound before. I'm sorry to frighten you, you began, and just as you expected, the little pixie jumped at the noise. Yet, much like Aiden had done, she remained in place, and instantly began to flap her wings in a strange form of communication that the pixies had constructed. Almost at once, the guard pixies had let go of their weapons and returned to their proper places and their holders strapped to their bodies, though they still remained close. You wondered if she was translating the conversation that was currently being held. Upon further observation, the remaining elders and guards drifted a bit closer as well, most likely in order to see better the patterns in which the pixie flapped her wings and read the message that you had brought to them. It's been so long since I've heard any sound. The pixie responded in a sweetly angelic and feminine voice, and consistent with the Scottish-like accent that Aiden had spoken in. 20 years, in fact. I thought I thought that I wouldn't live to ever hear it again. You remember that the world was like before the sound and color was taken away?" You asked in intrigue. "Of course," the pixie responded, a small and bitter smile crossing her beautiful face as she reminisced. "Although I'm sure the two of you are too young to remember, eh? Us elders are the only ones of our kind who can remember. My name is Boney, and I am the youngest of the elders at 30 years old. I was only a child of 10 when our lovely world was taken from us, and the oldest of the elders was not but 15. "What happened?" you asked softly, "to the rest of your kind?" "But of course you must know," she responded swiftly, and it seemed as if you had hit a nerve. "Struck down mercilessly by you humans, our parents, siblings, grandparents, friends, teachers, schoolmates, and every other one that we had ever known. Only 8 of us successfully hid in our classroom in the school. And we could only wait as Erebus and his followers massacred every pixie adult, child, and even infant that they could find. And then the color and the sound was gone. We were granted the inability to hear the screams, but we could still see and smell the evidence, the bodies, and the blood." "That's a terrible, terrible story," you whispered in genuine sadness. For you couldn't even begin to imagine the pain and horror that Boney and the rest of the elders had witnessed at the hands of Erebus and his following. "I'm very sorry." Bonnie nodded, her wavy hair fluttering lightly in the breeze. "I have heard that you were sent by Dorian," she asked in a clear attempt to change the tragic topic. "I have never met him, but we elders have always known he was a great warrior in his time. He and Iris tried to stop Erebus, but considering that the color and sound are gone, we have all since assumed that they have both been captured. Are you here to tell me that they are free?" "Free? Free?" you asked in confusion. "What do you mean, free?" Do you not know?" Bonnie asked. "Every being in this world has a purpose. Dorian is the holder of sound, and Iris of color. These are 2 very known elements, so they are recognized by many. Yet, when one holder has died, the other element is passed on to another new soul, a baby. This soul is not distinguished by species. Therefore, considering that sound and color has never been returned to us, we have since assumed that Dorian and Iris are still out there somewhere, captured or in hiding. We wondered if Dorian or Iris would ever reach out to us, but for the past 20 long years they haven't. Are you the form in which they come? Dorian is my grandfather." Helen finally spoke up, and Bonnie turned her large eyes onto him, causing Helen to shrink back just a bit in intimidation. "Iris is my mother. I have lived with my grandfather for the past 20 years in hiding, but as far as my mother's whereabouts, I don't know where." "I see," Bonnie confirmed in sympathy. "It is possible, then, that she has been captured. After all, Erebus is—" You leaned forward, and a look of fear crossed Helen's face, yet it would seem that Bonnie had decided to rethink the information that she was about to spill. "Never mind that," she then waved off, "and you didn't even find it in your place to press for details, and even if you were rather curious. Instead, I will ask the reason why you were sent to us by Dorian." "We were sent in his steed," Helen answered, a slightly disturbed look still evident on his face at the thought of his mother being held captive somewhere. "Erebus needs to be stopped, but Dorian is aged, sick and weak by this point. We believe our first plan of action is to gain alliance of others. We'll need all the help we can get. And I want to find my mother." "How many species so far have you gathered the assistance of?" Bonnie asked in curiosity. "You are the first," Helen answered. "Dorian suggested starting with the pixies and the fairies." "This is an understandable choice," Bonnie mused, and this piece of information only seemed to solidify and further validate the information that you and Helen were claiming. Dorian has always been on good relations with us, as well as the fairies. I've heard many, many great tales about him in school when I was a child. Do you think that the other species wouldn't be as willing to speak with us peacefully?" You couldn't help but ask, and Bonnie smiled lightly as you sought after her advice, further why am I saying this so wrong? Establishing a mutual bond of trust. As you most likely seen, you humans are not in anyone's favor, she mused. I suppose that you will receive a similar reaction from the fairies as you have us, but beware of the centaurs, minotaurs, and dragons. Dorian had never had the chance to establish the same relationship with them as he had with us. I apologize, but I do not know enough of the mere people or the griffins, yeah, I said that right, to be able to comment on them. I believe, though, that if you have one of another species to accompany you on your journey, you might be seen in a bit more of a positive light. If they can see that you had established a good relations with species that are different from your own, they might be a bit more willing to hear you out. You're offering us one of your own? You asked in astonishment, a pixie to come with us? I believe it may be necessary, she nodded. I would go with you myself, but as an elder, my place is here. May I suggest Blair, one of our stronger guards? She then gestured towards the pixie with the space buns that had taken upon herself to lead you to the elders in the first place. Or Drew, one of the bravest hunters. If I may, you began, and Helen shot you a skeptical look, for he just knew what you were going to suggest. I would like to request Aiden. Aiden? Bonnie asked, her deep eyes widening in surprise, and as she flapped her wings in order to relay your rather strange request, the other pixies, be them elders and guards, looked at each other in shock and doubt. He's barely 18, and the newest member of our patrol group, uncoordinated, ditzy, and unskilled. Are you sure that what you want? Sharing a look with Helen in an attempt to ask him for permission of the decision that you were about to make, he merely shrugged at you and gave you a do what you must look before nodding his head in affirmative. Yes, we would like Aiden to come with us, if that's okay with him. You reiterated, being sure to allow Aiden the freedom to deny the request if he chose to do so. As you wish, Bonnie responded, flapping her wings yet again, and the pixie who you knew now to be to be named Blair flew off again, disappearing beneath the long blades of grass. We will fetch him. Bonnie, origin, Scottish Gaelic, meaning pretty, charming. Ooh, this is getting good. I'm sorry, this is getting so good. So good. Anyways, I believe we are in chapter 13, A Faithful Mother. As Blair, the guard pixie that was meant to go and fetch Aiden, disappeared into the depths of the tall and lightly swishing blades of grass, Helen sent you a side-eyed glance that betrayed all signs of skepticism at your request. Yet, he still had a tight hold of your wrist, and you imagined that he would not be willing to break your trusted form of communication, at least not during a time like this. Bonnie had since fluttered away from you and Helen, and the closer to the group of the elder pixies who remained hovering slightly above the blades of grass, and began to communicate with them once again with the beating patterns of her wings. A few of the elders had their eyes locked solely on her before responding to whatever she was saying about you, while a couple others merely observed you and Helen from afar. The most of them seemed to hold much more interest in Helen than in you, most likely due to the fact that they had learned that he was the grandson of Dorian. However, one in particular not even once turned her large and dark eyes off of you, studying you in the utmost curiosity with her head lightly tilted to the left and her long dark hair falling over her left shoulder as she stared, not knowing what else to do. You merely stared back in wonder, and she at long last blinked at you slowly, her serious expression never once faltering, before she sent you a knowing look, and finally returning her attention back onto Bonnie and whatever conversation she was having with the other elders. You wondered what she was thinking, for it certainly seemed like she knew something. She probably knows that you're not from the world that they think you are. YN? Helen called towards you, his voice clear and sharp as it called for your focus. It was at this point that you realized that he had been trying to get your attention several times by this point, jumping a bit of what almost felt like a trance that had caught your eyes with the pixie that had been staring at you, you sent a sheepish look Helen's way. The strength of his voice had clearly caught you off guard. Excuse me. Where are we at? For it was a tone that you weren't quite used to hearing from him, as he normally took a softer and gentler quality to his speech. Sorry, you apologized. I guess I was lost in thought. Oh, good. Helen breathed in relief, his voice once more returning into its normal volume. I was afraid that something had gone wrong with our pens. What is it? You asked, attempting to give your full attention to Helen, but it was difficult, for your eyes kept darting back to that pixie from time to time. Strangely enough, you got the vibe that she was doing the same. Are you sure? Helen then asked you, giving you a doubtful look as he asked you what was on his mind, and you rose an eyebrow in confusion at his poorly phrased question. Helen scrambled to reiterate, about him, the pixie that you want to come with us. He seems a bit unexperienced. Are you sure you want him to come with us? You acknowledged, but before once again catching the eye of the pixie with the long dark hair. This time, though, for the strangest reasons, she sent you the smallest of smiles before nodding her head lightly. Why did it feel like she knew that what you were saying? I'm not sure why, you continued to gather your thoughts, and Helen sent you a strange look, almost as if he could tell that he didn't have your full attention. But it just feels right, you know? Letting out a hum and shrugging his shoulders, he returned his attention back in front of him. I suppose. He agreed quietly. I assume you have your reasons, even if they're difficult to explain. I can relate to that. Sporting a relaxed smile, you followed Helen's lead as you fixed your gaze back in front of you as well. It certainly felt nice, not having to explain yourself to the core for once. It always felt like that back at home. You had always been expected to tell everyone exactly what was going on in your mind at all times. People could never just let things go and allow your unfinished or incomplete thoughts to evaporate into nothingness. It was a bother to always be expected to have an answer for everything. Sometimes things just couldn't be explained, and some things were better left unsaid. You found immense relief in the fact that Helen seemed to understand this. The swishing motion of the blades of grass moving a bit more violently than what the light breeze that surrounded you was capable of producing caught both you and Helen's attention, and soon enough the tiny forms of two pixies pushed past atop the wild greenery. The first one to emerge was Blair, soon followed by no one other than Aiden. As he came into view, his large and dark eyes struggled to focus in on something as he blindly searched the area. And that was when you remembered that the fact that Aiden was horribly nearsighted. Pushing some of his wild and unruly bangs out of his way, he blinked several times and squinted a bit as he finally seemed to locate the blurry forms of you and Helen standing off at a distance that was too great for him to see properly. Jeez, you mumbled to Helen, for he was the only one who was able to hear you. And they put him on patrol squad? That doesn't suit him at all. What do you mean? Helen asked in response, obviously not putting two and two together as he blankly stared at Aiden. He can't see a thing, you remarked, attempting to hide your laughter. I wonder if we can help him find something that could improve his vision. Foretelling? As you let your thought hover in the expanse of warmly cool air that belonged in only a place that was caught in between winter and spring, Aiden flew towards the both of you at a rather quickened pace. Now that he had processed what it was that he was looking at, you braced yourself for the energetic impact, as you knew that he was just about bursting to say something to you and about his newly appointed job. Contrarily to what you expected, Aiden did not run into you head first, but instead came to a sputtering stop just centimeters from your face, and reached out with two hands to grab both of your cheeks. Are you sure? His first of the inevitable onslaught of questions tumbled out of his mouth at a rate that was fast and furious, at points even tripping over his words and syllables as he had too much that he wanted to ask at once. Are you sure you want me? I mean, I'd love to. Of course I would. I don't like being around on the patrol squad, if I had to be absolutely honest with you. And I would just like you to know, but seriously, are you sure? Why me? Why do I have to offer in your journey? I've never done anything right in my life. I wasn't good at school. Now I'm a disappointment to my family. I can't see 3 feet in front of my face. I have to bow an arrow. And I think I could use them well. So I've been practicing them quite a bit, but I can't even see. So are you really positively sure? Of course. You couldn't help but laugh a bit. Although you did feel rather bad about the self-deprecating way he referred to himself in. Surely he had more value than he was letting on, or even what he really believed. Even if he had to work on it just a bit. And even though he had flaws, you knew that he was stronger than what he knew himself. Now that you thought about it, though, all of you had things to work on. You could always be better, and Helen had room for improvement too, in which case, you didn't want to deny him the chance to show others what he could do, for even you didn't fail to notice a critical way the others had referred to him. Not only was this journey to restore this world, but in a way, this was also a journey to restore of this. But in a way, this was also a journey of the self, for all 3 of you. I have confidence in you, Aiden. Giving a nod in your direction and sending Helen a half smile, to which Helen didn't seem to really know how to respond, Aiden let go of your cheeks before coming to a top of your shoulder. He stood there tall, and you could tell he was appearing to look confident and brave in front of the elders and guard pixies that stood opposing him now. Almost as if he was trying to tell them that he would most certainly prove his worth. Following his gaze, you noted that he looked upon the faces of the elder quite briefly and respectfully, only to top on the face of the elder with the long and dark hair, the same pixie that had been staring at you before. They stared at each other for quite a while, and Aiden squinted in an attempt to see her clearer, but you weren't sure exactly how well he could see her. The slightly forlorn look that he had on his face, however, told you that this pixie and him meant something to one another. Aww. Now that was the purpose of you, Helen, and Aiden had been established. The pixies began to return back to the underground's home one by one. After a few moments, only 2 elders and a few guards remained, Bonnie and the pixie with the long, dark hair. The 2 elders exchanged a look, as well as a few words of communication through the flaps of their wings. Before at long last, the dark-haired pixie made her way towards you. A tiny grin spread itself across Aiden's face as she approached. You wondered what it was that she had to say to you, Helen, and most importantly, Aiden. Bravely extending a small hand, she gently curled her entire grasp around one of your fingers, and looked up. Her eyes this time were not focused on you or Helen, but instead onto Aiden's. Mom. Aiden was the first to break the silence, and the dark-haired pixie's large eyes became a bit teary-eyed at what most likely was the first time that she had ever heard her son speak. She and Aiden had been a vital part of the others' lives for 18 years, yet this very moment was the first time that she had ever been able to hear her child to actually call her mom. Now that she was closer to you, you were able to observe her eyes in greater detail. They held the same equalities to Aiden, large, dark, and full of childlike wonder and emotion. An emotion that had been slightly dwelled in the older pixie's eyes due to age, wisdom, and a lifetime of pain, but a quality that still existed nonetheless. It was still there, if one were only to look. I'm going, Aiden declared, and he held both of his hands together as he allowed himself to hover lightly in front of his chest. His head was slightly bowed, and his hair hung into his eyes, as he seemed to be just a bit unable to look at his mother fully in the eye. I've struggled to find my place here. I was never really good at anything, or any of the jobs that I've tried, and I think that, well, maybe it's just because my place isn't here. And I think you know it too. So this is my chance, and I have to take it. I have to go to find what it is I'm meant to be. And I know that even though everyone else here doesn't believe in me, I hope that you do. Of course I believe, the pixie responded in a beautifully feminine voice, the warmth and peace of a mother's love dripping from her words, and the expression on Aiden's face cracked at the mere sound. His face scrunched up as he scrambled to wipe a tear. I've always known that you were meant to do things that the rest of us just can't understand. It's okay to not be cut out for what the world thinks you should be here for. It's time for you to go and chart your own course. Letting go of your finger, she floated towards Aiden. Letting go of your finger, she floated towards Aiden and placed both of her hands on his cheeks in a gesture of endearment. Suddenly, the way that Aiden had placed his own hands on both of your cheeks seemed to be much more notable and profound. It seemed to be for him as a way to express loyalty and inevitable friendship. Perhaps he felt a connection to you, just as you had to him. A connection that was impossible to put into words, but a strong connection all the same. Perhaps it was an untold force that was communicating to you without words, telling the both of you that this place was not his tribe, but to go with you. The most unlikely of pixies who would end up playing a vital part in changing the world. Even if none of the other pixies believed this, his mother seemed to know as well. After a few comforting and reassuring words towards her son, the pixie straightened herself up and turned her attention back to you, grabbing your finger once again, smiling at you lightly as she began to speak. Hello, Helen. She greeted the both of you kindly. My name is Alessine. I'm one of the elders, but of course, I'm sure you already knew that. You nodded in her direction, and Helen gave a reluctant nod as well, seemingly unsure of what else he should say. I can tell that the others are feeling a bit skeptical about you, but allow me to just say that I believe in your success. From here, I would suggest fighting the fairies. Not only should you be able to converse with them peacefully, but they should be able to give you some information about how to find the centaurs. This should be your next course of action. Okay, you acknowledged. Thank you. Of course. Ashleen nodded. One more thing, before you go. I just wanted to mention that I sense there's something about you, Ian. Something different. Almost as if you have brought a new role with you when you came into this world. You jumped in surprise at her declaration. How did you know that I came from a different world? You asked in wonder. I've never mentioned. However, it would seem that Awesome was not willing to further offer an explanation to her statement, and merely gave you a small smile, sending a last, long look towards her son. She bid the three of you farewell as she slowly sunk deep into the blades of the tall grass, soon to be followed by Bonnie and the remaining guards. Ashleen, Scottish Gaelic, meaning vision. Aw, that's cute. That is so cute. Aw, that is. Aw. Alright, y'all, so I believe this is chapter 14. If I'm correct. If I'm not correct, just. I'll put it on the screen. But, anyways. Chapter 14, if I'm correct. A worried brother. Grayson, it's fine if you don't want to come down and join us, the rest of us, for breakfast, but please don't sleep until noon. Your dad is going into town today, and I'll need your help with moving some furniture around. With a final provoking knock on the aging and withering wood of his pale purple door, Grayson listened intently to the sound of his mother's footsteps descending the creaky stairs before he let out a groan of irritation and flipped over on his side, further drawing the blankets up and around him into a cozy cocoon. As the mid-morning air was quite damp in this mountainous region, he returned his attention to his phone. Of course he wasn't sleeping his morning away, as his parents often assumed him to do. Then they realized his refusal to join them for breakfast wasn't just because he wanted to sleep until noon, but because he was so freaking annoyed with them that he couldn't even stand to be in the same room. Besides, he had more important things to do than join them around the table for pancakes, waffles, or whatever, and pretend to be some happy little family that decided to set out on an adventure together and buy some weird, old, and decrepit house in the middle of nowhere. No, she was convinced that his sister's disappearance was more than a mere desire to explore the town, as his parents had nonchalantly put it, and he was determined to find out where exactly she had gone. In fact, he couldn't help but cringe in a mixture of anger and worry as he recalled the conversation that happened in between his parents and him when he was asked, out of concern, if they had known where Wyatt had gone. "Don't worry about her so much, Gray," his mom had insisted. "You know how she is, always exploring and getting into new things. She probably just decided to check out the town at the base of this mountain. Rumor has it that there's a bunch of old antique shops and used bookstores there that I'm sure she'd be interested in. Perhaps she had just lost her track of time. Her car's still here," Grayson pointed out in agitation, "and there's no way she'd walk all the way down the mountain for something like that." "Maybe she found a hot Tinder date," his dad had joked a bit with a laugh. "The point is, Grayson, Wyatt is 24 years old. She's a grown adult. It's not so strange for adults to go out and do their own thing. My bet is a few of her friends had been curious about her new living conditions and had come over to see before they went out somewhere. She's not a child. She's capable of taking care of herself. We don't need to be breathing down her neck all the time. Relax." There's a difference between that, and then there's also a difference between you guys literally live on the mountain in the middle of nowhere. She could have gotten lost, as in saying she could have gotten lost and can't find her way back home and could perish. Just saying. You're not living like in a neighborhood. You're living in the literal middle of nowhere with wood, with like literal forest. You know what I'm saying? That's when I'd be a little concerned. Realizing that continuing to further argue his case with his parents would get him nowhere, Grayson had since stuffed his hands into his pockets, and retreated to his bedroom before slamming the door shut in the classical sign that he wanted to be bothered by no one. Ever since then, he had spent his time scrolling through his phone and checking out all the local areas where she might have gone off to. He had even considered going into her room himself and locating her car keys in order to take a drive around the town. But he hadn't gone that far yet. Perhaps it could be considered a bit strange that he only felt so worried about his sister. After all, she had only been gone for a day and a half by this point, since he had woken up the previous morning with her nowhere to be found. Yet he couldn't shake the weird and particular feeling that she had wandered off to somewhere strange, somewhere where she shouldn't have gone. It wouldn't have been the first time something like this had happened. Even though Grayson was several years younger than her, it often felt like he had to look after her in a way, since she was so reckless. It had morphed into a sort of brotherly responsibility over the years, and as he had grown older. Grayson couldn't help but recall a time when they were younger. He was about 8 while she was 15. She had insisted on climbing the tallest tree that she could find in the woods where her family had taken a weekend camping trip, all because she had been curious about what the view would look like towards the top, and had wanted to get a closer look. Back then, come on, Wyatt. My emotions. He had yelled up to her in a slight anxiety as she had lost her footing She had lost her footing more than once as she determinedly climbed her way higher and higher. "You'll get stuck up there and I'm going to have to come get you. If you manage to even clear half of this tree, I'll be impressed." Wyatt called back down with a hint of laughter in her voice. "Anyway, I'm almost there. Just a few more feet." "What do you want to see from the top of the tree so badly anyway?" Grayson huffed, his brown eyes darting nervously from his sister and her spot high up in the tree branches to the long drop to the ground below. He hated to admit it, but she was obviously right. He knew that there was no way he would be able to climb up that tree, or make any of the progress that she managed to do. If something bad would have managed to happen to her up there, he was too small, and his arms were too weak. He wasn't strong enough to be able to make it to her should she need the assistance of someone. He was only 8 years old. "Just come back down, please." Grayson had resorted to begging. "You're being stupid." Wyatt had not answered his inquiry, and he couldn't tell if he should have been alarmed or not, for it could mean that either she was concentrating on what her next move was, or she was too secretly worried that she would inevitably fall. After a few minutes of only hearing the sound of bugs, birds, and other woodland creatures of the forest singing out their late summer tunes, Grayson jumped in anxiety as he heard a small shriek that belonged to no one but his sister from atop the tree. "YN!" he called out, bracing himself for the sickening sound of splintering branches and wood as she took a tumble from the highest point of the tree. She would break her neck if she fell. She could break her neck if she fell, or her arm, or her leg, or her wrist. She might strike her head against a rock and crack it open. Surely she couldn't easily sustain a fall from such a height with only a few minor injuries. He took a few steps towards the trunk of the tree, only to hesitate. Should he jump onto the tree, or should he attempt to swing his body onto the lowest hanging branch? How had she done it? He wished he would have paid more attention to how exactly she climbed instead of arguing with her. "I'm fine, Gray," Wyatt had called, amusement present in her voice at the situation. "But, I think you may need to get Dad. There's a bunch of thorns on these higher branches, and they're all stuck in my clothes. I can't get loose. You idiot!" Grayson had snapped, dropping to his feet as he had since proceeded to jump up and limply hang from a lower branch before she called out to him, absolutely unsure of how to respond. "I hope you're happy with your stupid view, by the way. Don't you dare move until I get back with Mom and Dad." "Don't worry, Gray," his sister called out to his retreating back as he scrambled to collect his parents, and not much looking forward to explaining the situation to them about exactly how his sister managed to get herself stuck up top one of the tallest trees in the forest. The view, it's absolutely breathtaking. Ever since that camping trip, Grayson had since realized how powerless and little he was, how unfit he would manage to be in the situation that he would have to protect his sister. After all, it was very much obvious to him that his sister massively lacked a sense of judgment or even common sense, as she did what she felt like doing in the moment without much considering the consequences of her actions. It was a bit tiring, for he constantly had to feel like he had to look after her, and he always ended up second-guessing the decisions that she had made. As he entered his teenage years, he found himself spending more and more time at the gym in a desperate attempt to become strong, and it wasn't for the superficial reasons that everyone else seemed to think. Sure, he liked the look of having strong arms and toned abs, but it was so much more than that. If his sister had ever managed to put herself in a questionable situation again, he wanted to make sure he was capable of getting her out of it. Oh, that's sweet of him. Finally pushing the blankets and covers off of him, he shivered as he grabbed for a blue pullover hoodie, one of his sports sweatshirts from his old high school, and he pulled it over his head. He ignored the mess of curly black hair that sat atop of his head in his taper fade haircut. He wasn't too concerned about the state of his hair for the time being. His hair was so curly to the point where it took him a while to properly style it anyway. Popping his pair of black-framed glasses on his face, for he was currently feeling too lazy to put in his contacts, he rushed to put a pair of sneakers as he listened to the sound of a car door on the outside of the house slamming shut, indicating that his dad was heading into town. While his dad was out and his mom was currently outdoors attending to the overgrown and untamed garden, he had wanted to check out something real quick. During his time in his room, he had tried to recall and piece together every single interaction that he had between himself and YN before she had disappeared. Maybe no one else had noticed it, but he certainly took note of the way she had stared at the locked basement door after their dad had mentioned no one could be able to get it open. For some reason, he couldn't help but wonder if this had any significance. After all, he did know YN to be a curious one. What was on the other side of that door? He just knew that she would definitely attempt to figure it out. "So, what did my mom mean about you coming from another world?" Aiden asked, swinging his legs as he sat on your shoulder, his little feet lightly coming into contact with your chest in a rhythmic pattern as his wings fluttered lightly. Your new group of 3 had been walking through the forest and occasionally fields for quite some time by this point, endlessly following the softly glinting lights of the spirits who had always seemed to float on the very edge of your vision up ahead, continuously guiding you and showing you whichever way you needed to go in order to meet the fairies. In fact, You had been walking for so long that Aiden had since taken to sitting on your shoulder instead of standing, and Helen had broken away from your communicative contact for the time being. You assumed it probably had something to do with wanting to get away from Aiden's constant chattering, but you couldn't be completely sure. I mean, it's exactly how it sounds, Aiden. You laughed. I guess there are more worlds out there than what we know. That makes sense then. Aiden snapped his fingers for emphasis as he grinned knowingly at you, showing off his dimples and razor-sharp teeth. That's why you're so weird. Wait, does he know? Aiden then asked, immediately blocking off your attempts to argue with him and his slight insult, even if you weren't really offended, as he pointed towards Helen. Helen seemed to notice right away Aiden's pointer finger, and he caught your eye, shaking his head in the negative in order to communicate that to you that he just needed a break from all the noise. He can't be from another world, too, can he? He's Dorian's grandson. Wait, hold on. I'll go ask him, since he ran away from us earlier. Aiden, you called out, lightly grabbing a hold of his wing as he meant to fly away, halting his attempts to further harass Helen. Instead of that, could you tell me how well you know these woods? I think we need to take a break soon. Or maybe try to set up some type of camp somewhere for the night. I'm getting a bit tired from all the walking. Oh, okay. Aiden nodded, grinning widely as he landed back on your shoulder. I mean, we've stepped out of the Pixie's normal boundaries ages ago, so this is all untraversed territory for me. Untraversed territory for me as well. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but I mean, I've never heard of anything dangerous in these woods. Gesturing towards Helen that you had wished to stop for a moment and regroup, you then suddenly glanced towards the sky in wonder. A world without color must mean that a night sky grew even darker than what you were used to back home. You supposed, if you mixed into factors of as shadowy woods and dark trees, bushes, and undergrowth, it would make the most sense to set up some sort of camp while you still had a bit of evening light left. You wondered if this was something that Helen noticed too. Helen approached your side and reluctantly took a gentle hold of your hand before sending a slightly hesitant look towards Aiden, wondering if the talkative pixie was about to bombard him with questions or not. But before Aiden even had the chance to open his mouth, you took the initiative to start the conversation. It's getting late, and I'm worried about how dark the forest will get once night hits. You spoke up. As soon as you brought about the topic of nightfall, a chilling breeze swooped through the area, and you supposed that the rattling leaves and tree branches would have been rather loud if you had been able to hear them as the wind blew the forest about, unconsciously shivering. You suddenly were quite grateful of the almost unnatural heat that Aiden's body produced as he stood up against your shoulder, and you couldn't help but take the tiniest step towards Helen, his hand feeling warm and comforting in your grasp. To your utmost surprise, Helen did not take a step away. Do you think we should set up some type of camp? Helen asked softly, the wind blowing his dark hair into his eyes as he squinted in retaliation to the ever-picking up wind. Oh, if the wind bothers you, we should find somewhere deeper into the trees, Aiden suggested warmly, but not near the bushes. That'll be dangerous. Dangerous? You questioned in curiosity while Helen rose a concerned eyebrow in Aiden's way. What do you mean? Well, we don't want the undergrowth to catch fire, Aiden explained, giving you a mischievous grin. Didn't you know that I'm, really good at starting fires? Oh my god. I'm so sorry. That was so good. It was too good. That actually was funny. I'm so sorry. That was way too funny. Whew. Oh, good. Wait. Hold the front door. No way. No. No way. I'm so sorry, y'all, but I got some really, really sad news to share. So I'm reading the comments right now, and it says that it's discontinued apparently. Apparently the author has left the creepypasta fandom and discontinued any stories that they were doing of the creepypasta fandom. Damn. I'm so sad. Aww. This was getting so good. Oh my god. Oh, I'm so disappointed. No. Well, I'm so sorry to disappoint everyone, but this is apparently the last chapter that we will be able to read about this story ever, since it is apparently, as I'm reading it, discontinued. Oh yeah, that was over a year ago. Oof. Ugh. So I'm sad to say this, guys, but this story is discontinued from what I'm seeing so far. If by miracle I say, it gets updated, I will read it to you guys. I promise. But sadly, I'm gonna have to put this as a finished question mark. I am so sorry, guys. That is so sad. The story was getting so good. Damn, I didn't know that. Well, at least I've read this masterpiece. At least, even if it was the start of it, at least I've read it to you guys to show you just how much of a masterpiece this is. I'll still be probably reading a lot more from this author, because they've probably written a lot of stories. They probably have, because I'm seeing a lot of stories here of creepypasta that I probably could be reading. Probably could be reading. But if you guys have any stories now, because we now finished officially 2 stories, which is the Yandere SCP, and then now this one, until it actually gets updated in my dreams. But now I mention it, you guys, if you want to somehow continue the story, maybe, because I remember some authors, like, put, like, yeah, you guys can continue the story, and another thing, you can continue it on for me, etc., etc., etc. So I don't know if they, if the author particularly allowed anyone to continue their stories. I might actually look further into that, but I don't know so far, because it doesn't say anything in the comments or anything so far as I'm looking, but, yeah, it's so sad. I want to cry so bad. It's so good. It's so fucking good. Oh, it's so good. Not even to the love story. Man, that makes me sad. Anyways, my goodness. I will have to be putting up a vote soon, so. I'll probably be putting up a vote soon in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that. Since we did finish technically 2 stories. For the playlist and for the title of this story, I'm probably just going to put finished question marks / discontinued to let you guys know it wasn't actually finished, it was discontinued. I hope you guys did enjoy it, however. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more amazing videos, guys. I believe it is officially summertime. School is over. Yay, yay, yays. I'm able to upload more videos and cooler stuff like that. But sadly, your girl's gotta go because my throat feels like it's literally on fire. I'm about to burst into those blue flames that are even worse than fire. Don't know what those are, but they're hotter because they're blue. You get the point. But yeah, your girl's throat is about to go kabushki kaboobies, you know. Anyways, I shall see y'all guys in the newest, maybeest, truliest, other fanfiction. Bye and peace, y'all.